As I mentioned at our pre-class discussion, my goal, both in offering this class and in presenting in this class, is to focus on the most important opposition and hopefully the most sensitive point for attacking that opposition to effect change in my life, in the life of Americans. With that in mind, I want to rediscuss to some extent what William Binney and the current Russiagate controversy is about, and how it came about, and why it is illustrative of the forces arrayed against what I will call truth seekers. I'm going to show you a video, notwithstanding Joe's opposition to watching videos, that partially discusses it. William Binney is being interviewed by Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is a radio broadcaster who, oddly enough, actually does a fairly good job of inviting the right guests and asking the right questions. But even Mr. Dore is kind of baffled and astonished at what William Binney tells him. Because what William Binney tells him is this. Mr. Binney designed a spy program to look out on the world of electronics, looking out from the United States to the rest of the world, and sweeping in massive quantities of data about people outside the United States, and intelligently sifting through that data so that you could find the good pieces of fruit in amongst the sawdust of real enemies of the United States. Now, when you're sweeping out electronic information, looking out from the United States, you're always going to sweep up a certain amount of information about Americans living outside the United States. The program that Binney designed was intended to safeguard the privacy of those American citizens by instituting certain safeguards within the program itself. And Binney was proud of this program, and if I don't recall, I think the program was called Thin Line, but don't hold me to that.
Thin Thread.
Thin Thread, thank you. Binney resigned from the NSA when he discovered that Thin Thread had been turned around. It had been turned around so that it was no longer sweeping up massive amounts of electronic data from citizens of the world, but was sweeping up massive amounts of electronic data on American citizens. A gross violation of the law, and Binney recognized that, and he was appalled and disgusted and resigned from the NSA for precisely that. Not only were they sweeping up massive amounts of data, but the protections that Binney had built into the program had intentionally been abolished, so that whatever protections American citizens had for privacy were abolished. There was no such thing as privacy in the electronic sphere any longer in terms of the United States. Now, and Binney was initially arrested along with Tom Drake and a couple other people, and very fortunately, Binney had the documentation to prove that he had not broken the law, that the FBI had broken the law. Otherwise, Binney would be behind bars today. So, and the reason Tom Drake isn't behind bars today is because he was, A, he didn't do anything illegal, but equally importantly, he was in league with people who were protecting him from the illegality of the NSA and the FBI itself. Now, as an introduction to what took place in the electoral season, the NSA wanted to sweep up data on American citizens by tapping into the electronic instrumentation of Quest, in the other communications industries, other communication corporations. One of several executives refused official permission for the NSA to sweep up the data from their equipment. And the NSA taught Mr. Naccio, not Nacho, Naccio, a lesson. And in the process of teaching Mr. Naccio a lesson, they taught a lesson to any other executive that was going to go against what the NSA wanted to do. Mr. Naccio is now behind bars for insider trading because he sold some of the stock of Quest at various points in time. Did Mr. Naccio break the law? I really don't know. I know the NSA is perfectly capable of creating false evidence. I also know that in the process of sweeping up this data, they will sweep up information and either store that data that demonstrates that Russ has broken the law, or if they want to prosecute Russ now, but they do not want to reveal the way that they got their data on which Russ is prosecutable, they will tell the police, Russ has broken the law in this fashion. We cannot tell you how we know it, but we know it. So you go find whatever you can about Russ and collect the data independently and prosecute him. Now, what Mr. Binney is telling us is that the NSA not only is capable of creating false evidence, they're capable of finding out what Russ or Mr. Naccio did and choosing the time to prosecute and choosing the evidence by which to prosecute. So when the federal government went after Mr. Naccio for insider trading, they were able to find the evidence. But the NSA had taught a lesson to every executive that was inclined to disobey NSA rules. Because the NSA had evidence on every one of those executives, just as they have evidence on every one of the judges on the Supreme Court. They have evidence on everyone in Donald Trump's administration. And they have evidence on every senator and every representative in the House of Congress. Now, some of them may be squeaky, squeaky clean. And if they are squeaky, squeaky clean, guess what? Evidence can be fabricated. This kind of information came as an absolutely, virtually unbelievable piece of information to Jimmy Dore. And I'm giving it to you now. I'm summarizing it so that it will make sense as you are picking up the pieces from the interview. Now, what happened in the process of Russiagate was that somebody hacked into, or somebody gained access to the DNC computers. Shortly after this information was accessed and was revealed through a second party to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, a third party who took the name Guccifer2 said, I'm the person who hacked into the DNC computers, and here's the evidence. Binney, being the sharp character that he is, looked at the electronic evidence that Guccifer2 said he had, that he was a Russian and that he had hacked into the DNC computers. Binney took that evidence and said, no Russian stole this. Because for a Russian executive to have to do it, he would have had to access it from Russia. He would have had to access it from the internet. And the rate of download speed that Guccifer2 had could only be accomplished by a physical connection to the DNC computer. I'll retranslate that. the person who stole that information from the DNC computer at least the second time had physical access to the computer. We do not know about the rate of download speed of the initial thievery, although Seth Rich was murdered on the streets of Washington, D.C. a few weeks before Julian Assange revealed the information. What I'm pointing out is that a fake Russian was no Russian at all. Craig Murray, who is a former British diplomat, said, "I am the intermediary between the person who got this information and giving it to Julian Assange." Craig Murray says it wasn't a Russian. Julian Assange, who received the information from this anonymous source, said it wasn't gained from a Russian. So you have Mr. Murray's testimony and Julian Assange's message that it was not a Russian who gained access to the DNC computer. You have Seth Rich being murdered after having abundant access to the DNC computer and being reportedly somewhat unhappy with the way the DNC was conducting its business. Now, in the process of trying to cover their tracks, the DNC approached first an internet communications firm, and secondly, they approached the FBI saying, we've got to find a way of gathering dirt on Donald Trump. And the FBI said, basically, we'll cooperate. We will present evidence. You gather some preliminary evidence. We will present that evidence in the most favorable light, and we'll get a warrant from the FISA court to spy on some of Trump's people. By getting evidence in the way that the FBI got it, the warrant was illegal, and whatever information was acquired from those warrants was illegal, but it was still useful information to the FBI and the NSA and the Democratic National Committee. I think that's enough. I think with that as an introduction, you'll be able to put together what Mr. Binney is telling Jimmy Dore.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. You know, maybe you're as confused as me about the Nunes memo and who to believe and who not to believe and what does it mean. Was it before they said it was the most important thing, and then it got released, and then nothing happened. And so I just want I figured if there's anybody who can explain it to us, it's NSA whistleblower and member of VIPS, Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, who debunked the WMD's lie in real time as it was happening. So he's here with us right now. You know him from the show before. It's William Binney. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Pretty good, Jimmy. Good to be with you again.
Oh, it's so good to have you back. And so just so everybody knows who you are, just to remind them, you were with the NSA for 30 years. Would it be a stretch to say you were their top code breaker?
Oh, I would never take that claim on, but I did some pretty good stuff, so I had a lot of fun doing it. So
okay. So if you see, they even made a documentary about him. We're going to put a link, The Good American, and that's how, what a smarty pants this guy is over at the NSA. He invented Thin Thread, which was a metadata collection that was actually superior to what they're using now, and it protected everyone's identity. So, and it was inexpensive, so they had to get rid of that right away. Anyway, that's who William Binney is, and he's had the FBI lie about him. Correct? Did that happen?
Yes. In fact, they did it in sworn affidavits to the court. They also falsified evidence against us.
Right. Okay. So that's what they do to whistleblowers. And so
Yep.
that's why you can believe, that's why I feel like I can trust you and believe you. And because you've put everything on the line for your country and constitution and not a political party and not your own neck, right? I mean, it's for yourself. You did it for the country. That's a real patriot. So that's why I feel like I can go to you and you can explain it to us. And I hope you're willing to. Can you explain to people, because before the Nunes memo came out, first of all, I don't even think people realize why we have to guess about what stuff means because everything's done in secret at this thing called the FISA court. And how do you feel about it? No one even talks about that we even have a secret court. Does that bother you?
Well, that court should be disbanded, in my view. It doesn't belong to it doesn't belong to the Article 3 courts. You know, the difference between an Article 3 court and this court is an Article 3 court, you have opposing views on an issue, and both views are heard by the judge, and the judge adjudicates based on the law and the Constitution, but he hears both sides. In the FISA court, it's run on the 6th floor, I believe, of the Department of Justice building. There is nobody there but government people, and the only evidence they hear is what the government tells them, and they can't verify any of it. And so that means they're totally trusting to the government that lies to them and everybody else. And that's part of the felonies that are going on here and have been going on since September 11, has occurred. They've been committing these kinds of felonies all along.
So, okay, so people don't even understand. We have a special secret court that's supposed to be there to fight terrorism, but somehow they and you can get you can get warrants to wiretap people and stuff, which they did to the Trump administration through this court, this FISA court. And so I just want people to know that that's what this is all about. And the reason why no one really knows what's happening is because it's all done in secret. And what you're really describing is that it's not an adversarial process, that there's just there's nobody there. There's no defense to the judge. There's just what the government, the FBI or the CIA, whoever's presenting the case, what the Justice Department, what they say to the judge. That's all the judge hears. He doesn't know if it's verifiable. He has to take their word for it. But it turns out the FBI has even admitted a bunch of times, like said back in 2002, correct me if I'm wrong, that they actually did present false information to the FISA court all the time. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that came out in August, I think, of 2002, when they were talking about that FISA court. And it came out that they had basically misrepresented evidence in a court at least 75 times that the court found out. So that was at that time. Now, since then, they've gone through about 30-some thousand requests, and they've refused, I think, 5 or 10 maybe, and that's about it. There's another program going on here that's not even addressed by the FISA court, and it's done in secret, also in the Article 3 courts, the regular courts. What they've been doing, and this is where they have a program that's called parallel construction. That is, they will use the NSA data for common crimes committed inside this country.
What?
Because collecting all the data on everybody, they can do this, okay? They can find drug dealers, everything.
See, but that's against the Constitution, though. You can't do that.
We're doing it in secret, and we never tell you. That's why we know it's a crime. That's why we're keeping it secret from you. That's the whole point of it. And they're doing this regularly, and the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Administration, including the IRS, is a part of this. And they're all looking at this NSA data to find common crime.
Are you kidding me?
No.
Well, that's blatantly unconstitutional and illegal. I'm not kidding. Like, my hair should be on fire about this, right, Bill? That sounds crazy to me that they were able to do that.
Well, it even gets worse now. You have to wait for the worst to come along. Once they find common crime in the NSA data, they tip off local and state police to go arrest these people. They don't give them the evidence. They say, go arrest them. Go here when they come up in the truck or something, park in that parking place, go arrest them, bring in the drug dogs and find the drugs. Then in order to justify the arrest, what they do is called a parallel construction. And this is policy run by the Department of Justice of the United States. What it is they say, okay, we know these guys were criminals. We had it in the NSA data, but you can't use that data in court of law because it wasn't acquired with a warrant, so it's not admissible. So we have to go find the similar kind of data. Since we know where it is, it makes it easier. And we send the police out to do our own little investigation, assemble that evidence, and say, okay, now we're going to substitute this evidence for the NSA data in the court of law when we try them. When we do that, we can't put any of this statements of where the original source was from NSA. We can't give the court, the lawyers, or anybody in the criminal process the understanding that was the original basis. So that's perjury. Every time they did it, and according to Senator Feinstein, she had she stumbled and bumbled and gave this away. She said, "Oh, well, this program's been so valuable, we put hundreds of people in jail every year with it." Well,
Did you hear
that's thousands of people in jail based on perjury by the Department of Justice of the United States. And that's been going on since 9/11. They've been using the domestic spying program, the Stellar Wind program in NSA to do it.
So they're supposed to be using these NSA spying, right, in theory, to catch terrorists, right? Isn't that what this is? And why we're willing to give up this certain amount of rights is because they're supposed to be spying to get terrorists. But what you're saying is that
Yep.
they're using the surveillance state to do for regular crimes, and then
That's correct.
they're telling the cops, they're tipping off the cops, the local cops, about the crime, and then telling them. Did they tell them to scrub where you got this originally from, and then construct your own parallel investigate, or just go ahead and here's the information you have. Now go find some of your own evidence. That's what they're doing.
Well, they don't. They do that for them. They create the parallel construction, but they don't give them the raw data from NSA.
Okay.
All they do is tell them what to do once they know what's going to happen from that NSA data.
Right. Okay. So they'll say like, hey, there's going to be a drug deal go down at this place,
Right.
and then they'll show up, and that's
And
not
when
legal.
Reuters, and when Reuters reported this, they interviewed one of the federal agents involved in the program,
Uh-huh.
and he said, "This is such a great program. I just hope we can keep it secret." This is destroying our judicial system.
What? And so why doesn't? So how come there isn't anyone? I don't understand, Bill. It can't be as bad as it sounds because this obviously someone would be doing something about it, right?
Well, they're talking about doing something now because it's being used against the politicians in Washington. That's the
Oh.
only reason they're talking about. On the common people, we don't matter, okay? We're dealing with the Department of Just Us here, and we're not included in that.
And so why isn't there more people screaming about, you would think there would be people on the left and right who would be upset about the government intrusion of privacy like this? Because here's the problem, right? So why this matters, right? So if people go, I don't care if the government reads my email, if they catch a crime, not a criminal, who cares? Well, let's say you caught the government committing a crime and they knew it, and now they know that you know it, right? Because they're spying on you, right? And then they can now
Yep.
smear you or arrest you or charge you with something before you get
Make
to give
something
your.
up.
Is that
Yep.
what you're saying? Kind of that's
Yep.
one possibility, right?
Well, that's what they did to us, Jimmy. They made up information. The only difference is I caught them at it. So I threatened them with malicious prosecution. If I didn't have that evidence against them, and I gave them the evidence, so they knew I had the goods on them, so they backed off. That's the only reason they did that. Otherwise, and somebody at the Department of Justice felt so bad about what they were doing to us, they sent us a copy of their draft indictment on us. And so that even gave us even more evidence of their lying and perjury in an affidavit going to the court. That's a felony.
So it seems like no one gets in trouble anymore for committing, like Clapper. Clapper famously lied to Congress on TV, and nothing happens. And people
That's right.
people see what they do to, when Petraeus, when he gives up classified information, he gets a job teaching at NYU, and when someone else does it, they get thrown. They take a picture of themselves on a nuclear sub, a selfie. They get thrown in the clink. Right? So we see there's two tiers of justice, right? And now you're saying that this secret process and this parallel construction and this secret FISA court is now coming back to bite politicians in the ass. That's what you're saying. So now you're saying people are actually talking about, what are they saying? How are they? Who's talking about it? What are they recommending?
Well, I mean, it's this Nunes memo. It shows really the connection with Christopher Steele, his connections with the DNC and the FBI and the Department of Justice, and the collusion between them to fabricate evidence to present to the FISA court. That's another fabrication going forward to the FISA court to get a warrant to go and spy on just a person in the Trump campaign. But let me tell you what that does. That the intelligence community, once they're allowed to spy on somebody like that, they can go 2 hops from that person.
Well,
So that means
Go ahead.
every friend of that person, every friend of that friend. But it goes even beyond that because I opposed it originally, the 2 hop principle back in January of 2014, when President Obama was trying to do something to limit the scope of the spying and everything. So, and he limited it to 2 hops, but he didn't include the little restriction on that I was trying to get to him to say. The restriction is the second hop, you can't use a commercial business or a department of government to go through for that second hop. Because, for example, if in the first hop they consider going to Google, for example, then the second hop from Google out is to 1.5 billion people per day, which means that in a very few days you have everybody on the planet. That means that from that 2-hop principle, without excluding businesses or government agencies, you can go to basically everybody on the planet.
So
So
let's.
that
So let me just.
that
So,
opened it up to everybody.
so let me clarify what so people might be glazing over, because what's a 2-hop? So if they get a warrant to spy on one person, that includes, or implied in that warrant is that they can also spy on two people, like two separations away from them.
Yeah, like I call you, that's the first hop.
Uh-huh.
When you call somebody else, that's the second hop.
And so they get to listen in on all those conversations.
That's correct.
What the? I didn't know that. So when
Yeah.
so if they get a warrant on one person in the Trump administration, that's as good as getting a warrant on everybody
The
in
whole
the.
thing. That's right.
And so when Trump said, no, when Trump said that the Obama administration had bugged the Trump Tower, he what was he wrong, or was he kind of right,
No,
or
he was
what?
absolutely right. Yeah, he was absolutely right. But I wouldn't use the word bugged because they're doing it through the switch network. So it means that all they do is remotely from NSA, they can tie into everything from there remotely by attaching it to the switches. So all they do is say, give me everything out of this building, right? So, or give me everything on all the Trump people, and they know all those and all the phone numbers. So just give me all of it.
And so the problem with this the Nunez memo is about this process of getting this warrant for on
Right.
which give the government, the FBI, and everybody to get the ability to spy on the Trump campaign and administration, and the Democrats didn't want them to release it because they said it would jeopardize national security. They released it; it didn't jeopardize any national security. So
That's
now,
right.
their credibility is impugned over this memo, as far as I'm concerned. Right? They already
Yeah,
got
well,
caught lying about it. And so now it comes out, and what that memo revealed is what you're saying, is that you're saying that the FBI didn't give the judge all the information it was supposed to, and that
well, they
that's a felony.
misrepresented it,
Go
and
ahead.
that's a felony. That's a felony to misrepresent evidence in a court of law.
So you're saying you're going even one step further to say that the FBI misrepresented evidence to the FISA judge to get this warrant.
Yep. And
And
just
this,
like all the other parallel constructions since 2001 that they've been running, the FBI and the DEA, and that's been felonies all along. That's perjury in a court of law, perjuring and presenting false evidence. I mean, because it denies the defendant the right to discovery and challenge any of the evidence used against them, because it's false evidence, not the evidence that was really the basis for their arrest. It was the NSA data. That was the basis.
so,
But they can't introduce it because it's not admissible. So they have to do this parallel construction, and it ends up making them perjure themselves in a court of law.
and so why isn't anyone talking? Like, why wouldn't you would think some? Uh, so what? I just don't
Actually,
get
it's
it.
even worse than that,
How
though,
could this?
Jimmy.
I mean, how could this
It-
happen in America? Honest to God, I know that
Yeah.
sounds naive, right?
Well, I would agree with you. This is supposed to be my country, not theirs, and they're really destroying it. So, but it's not just our country, though. Goes through the MLAT network, Mutual Law Enforcement Treaty Act, through the representatives in all the embassies in the world that they have relationships with around the world, and they pass all this data out as alerts for them to go do things too. But they never give them the raw data. They never give them the evidence because it came from NSA. And this is clearly written down in the instructions for the DEA and out of the DOJ. You are not to talk about the source of this information in a court of law. You're not to put it down in anything writing or any evidential base. You don't do anything like that. You simply give the evidence to them, let them arrest, then do this parallel construction.
And
And that's what you substitute in court.
so what? And so what is it? Bill, are all the reporters over at CNN just dumb and they don't know about this? This is happening. I mean, the person who's their criminal justice lawyer or who whatever, or their intelligence reporter, wouldn't he know about this stuff? Wouldn't they be blowing the whistle on this all the time?
Yeah, they know about it, but they don't do anything because they are no longer performing their duty under the First Amendment of the Constitution. That's why the free press is there. They're supposed to be investigating what our government's doing and telling the people of the country what our government's really doing, and they're not fulfilling that responsibility.
Boy, so like if I like I found out. I mean, I didn't even. I mean, I couldn't wait to tell people about this, that this is happening. That's the whole point of having a show. So you're saying that the people in the media, you don't think it's just ignorance of this going on? It's just that they know it and they don't want to report it because it would upset their contacts at the government? What's in it for them not reporting it, you think?
Well, I mean, Jim Risen, Jim Rosen, the Associated Press, they all found out about what happens to things when you start to talk about things they don't want you to talk about.
Because then they get a wiretap on you, and then they
and you get threatened with grand juries and things like that, you know?
And it always seems like they get you for lying to the FBI. That always seems like this catch-all, right?
Yeah, that's the ultimate thing. If they can't get you for anything else, they'll get you for that. I mean, who can remember everything exactly when you go in and somebody asks you a question? How can you remember everything?
Right.
I mean, it's just almost impossible. So you always get caught with a lie. And they'll call it a lie. And yet they can lie to you and to courts in sworn affidavits and perjure themselves in a court of law, and nothing happens to them.
So, do you think that this Nunes memo actually reveals treason?
Yes.
But not
against
the kind
the founding principles of our nation, the Constitution.
And so, I know that's what we've been talking about for 20 minutes, but just lay out very briefly, how does this Nunes memo reveal treason?
Well, it's the fact that the DNC and the FBI and the DOJ coordinated to fabricate evidence to pass to the FISA court to get a warrant to spy on their other political opponents. That's using the agencies of the government against the government process per se. That's fundamentally sedition. Okay, You're trying to destroy the government, really, and that's really what's going on. But also, it's felonies, right? The felony lying to the court and fabricating evidence, covering up evidence, obstruction of justice. I mean, how many more things can we add here?
So, how would it ever get cleaned up? It doesn't. I mean, it seems like the whole agency, all the agencies are in on this, along with the court, and now. But you're saying the politicians are starting to turn?
Yeah, I think simply because it's being targeted at them, they're now starting to pay attention. Until they got targeted themselves, they weren't paying attention. I mean, who do we the simple people of the country, we don't matter.
Right.
Okay. Only those in charge matter.
Does Trump?
It's in bubble in D.C. You know.
Now I know you're in contact with Pompeo, correct? Is that an ongoing relationship, or is that a one-time deal?
So far, it's only been one time.
Okay. So do you think that the Trump administration has any? It would seem like it would be in their interest to want to get rid of this secret court, but then he would look weak against fighting terrorism. I wouldn't see that at all. He'd force it out in the open where people could understand what was going on, you know, and it wouldn't be a case you couldn't hide what all the crimes the intelligence community and the police are doing. Well, is he going to do that, you think?
I would hope so. I mean, that's why I came out and said all this stuff after the meeting, because I wanted to confront everybody, including the mainstream media, in the public.
I'm going to stop there because, unfortunately, historically, Mr. Trump has not taken up that opportunity. And I'm going to point out that the government that we were taught serves the people now clearly is not serving the people, it's serving itself. I'm calling that the deep state. And the deep state is kind of a shorthand for the people in several agencies that are working towards a goal that is separate from a government by, for, and of the people. Another power center, because I entitled this, The Powers Arrayed Against Us. Another power center is what I will call the ruling elite, the transnational, exceedingly wealthy people. Some of them fund a variety of charitable organizations. George Soros provides funds for a number of organizations to promote democracy. Others of them promote historical research. For example, the American Historical Society was basically established by foundational grants from a number of tax-exempt foundations. You will recall the interview that G. Edward Griffin gave with Norman Dodd. And Norman Dodd says that the very instruction vis-a-vis history needed to be altered in the United States. And when they could not get the leading historians of the United States to change how they taught history, they basically funded alternative PhD historians who, once they got into positions of responsibility, towed the party line. These elites, by one way or another, put people in positions of power. You can say that the Round Table Organization in Great Britain, the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States, the Trilateral Commission that includes members of Japan. You can talk about the Bilderberg Group that includes people from Europe as well as the United States. These are people who decide what's going to happen, not in a corporation or in a country, but by reaching a uniformity of opinion, by reaching a consensus. They decide what is going to be decided in 200 or 2,000 corporation boards. They decide what is going to be accomplished in Japan by virtue of manipulation of currency. This is I will call it the other power center. But I want to point out that this power center is smart in the sense that they know that they need your cooperation and mine. I want to point out that the exercise of power very closely is intimately connected with influencing what you think and what you consider important. Now, in the last 50 years, the most pressing concern for the vast majority of Americans is what?
I'm sorry, say that all again, just.
The most pressing concern of I'll make it a little easier. The most pressing concern of almost every American family for the last 50 years has been what?
Job security?
Pardon me?
Job security?
That's one way of saying it. It's going to be how much money do I have versus how much money do I need to function. In 1960, it was possible for a family of 4 to survive on the income of one wage earner. In 1980, it became progressively necessary for that same family to survive on an income of 2 people, 2 wage earners. In 2015, that requires at least one of the 2 wage earners to have 2 or 3 jobs. Financial security is my way of saying it, but Janet's assertion of job security is another way of saying the same thing. Financial security. What was the last TV program that you watched where financial security was a central theme. I'm not going to wait because I know the answer. You haven't seen that program in the last 50 years. The last movie that was made about it had racism on top of financial security, and that was A Raisin in the Sun. Now, you'll see TV programs on terrorism. You will see TV programs on spies. You'll see TV programs on masterful military exploits, but not a single one on the major concern of the American family. Why? You're being taught what is important to you. Because that's not what is important to you if you look at your life. So you better learn what's important to you from the television set, because that's what the people in authority want you to be thinking about. I'm going to play a short segment from a video by, I didn't include it. That's unfortunate. It's not crucial, but it's unfortunate.
Well, wait a minute.
Go ahead,
Before you do
Joe.
that, Tom has been talking about the gun business and the schools. And you made the point, is the last shooting in Florida, I don't know, did you call it a false flag, or did you were saying, because they're trying...
James Spetzer is saying that most, if not all of the most of the gun shootings are staged.
They're staged, okay? So they're staging these guns, so we keep thinking about security or thinking about terrorism or, so we're...
Or any other thing that you can be excited about that's not going to change the basic structure of society.
Right, and to distract you from the economic question.
Stavka. It is largely a matter of distraction or misdirection. A magician's job is to get you to look at the least important place so that he can accomplish what he needs to accomplish,
You can pick your pocket.
to pick your pocket or whatever.
Look away so you can pick your pocket, okay?
There's no such thing as gun violence. There's violence performed by human beings using a gun. But it's one of the little techniques to call it gun violence.
Yeah.
I had my annual physical the other day, and because I am entertaining, I let the staff physician have the med student first crack at me. So I said, Nick, why is there an opioid crisis and a gun violence crisis, but the mass media is not talking about an obesity crisis? Well, Nick was a little slow, but he finally got it. He said, there's a lot of money to be made in obesity crisis by ignoring the obesity crisis. And the other two types of crises we can do something about by making somebody else change their habit pattern. But if we take on the obesity crisis, I have to change my behavior. It's largely a matter of distraction, and what the video was going to tell you is that this distraction prevents you from rising up and casting off your shackles. It prevents you from rising up and identifying that source, the ruling elite. I'll use another example. At the church I attend, we have started a discussion group that's discussing 6 social problems over the next 6 weeks. And the leader of this discussion group gave us a list of potential subject topics. Among that list was wealth inequality, which Mahatma Gandhi said was the greatest form of violence, that poverty was the greatest form of violence. They have selected, the members of this group, not this group, but the group at church, has selected 6 topics, excluding wealth inequality. The most outstanding, ask any sociologist, the most outstanding social problem in the entire world today is wealth inequality and financial insecurity.
So what were the 6 subjects that they picked?
One was bullying, one was gun violence. I don't recall what the other 4 were.
Yeah, so they were all just.
They were all looking at symptom here and symptom here and symptom here, and they were oblivious to the causes.
Well, and inside of a church group like you're talking about.
These are intelligent people. I'm not
No,
knocking
we
them.
understand that, but they're not, they don't have to face the fact that they've got a lot of impoverished people inside that spectrum.
On that score, you're absolutely correct. And like a number of relatively wealthy people, they don't like to be reminded that 90% of the human population is below them on the socioeconomic scale. And when the military starts protecting the haves from the have-nots, the people that I am alluding to are assuming they're going to be on the inside of the circle being protected by the military from the outside.
And they are, in reality.
Well,
Now, let me say this before you get
Go
too
ahead.
far down. My brother Bill went to jail around one of those contrived situations.
right.
But not in the military, it was in the private sector.
Mhm. Dawn,
When talking kind of about that parallel construction, I wasn't clear if they were talking about finding out, doing illegal wiretapping and finding out that something illegal had happened, and then going out and watching that person for another instance of the same illegal happening. Or if they meant they knew something illegal happened, and so they went out and falsified evidence of that same occurrence. So it seems to me that that's pretty different.
it is different, and the short answer to your question is if they can get the evidence without falsification. Let's suppose you have a person who is repetitively insider trading. You wait till he does it the second time. I want to point out that in the case of Mr. Naccio, he was convicted of X number of counts of insider trading. Can you tell me how many bank managers and or financiers went to jail over insider trading in 2008 or because of the events of 2008? Because I can tell you, 0. So, only under the worst of circumstances are they going to fabricate it. But it has happened.
If they need to fabricate it, they will.
If they need to fabricate it, they will. If they don't need to fabricate it, they won't. Catherine Austin Fitts was indicted on a number of charges in the operation of her investment firm, Hamilton Securities. She insisted on going to trial because she knew, she apparently was not high on the pecking order. They were threatening her with prosecution, and they didn't bother to fabricate the false evidence. So when she insisted that they take it to trial, the judge threw the case out because the FBI didn't have anything worth prosecuting. But let's suppose that William Binney had not had the insurance of evidence in hand that the FBI had been doing these things. Then he would have been wound up behind bars because the FBI could say, you acquired this information illegally. In other words, I agree with Joe, I cannot pick a single incident where it is true, but if they need to have the evidence, I am sorry to tell you that they will. Now, this is the deep state. This is not necessarily the ruling elites. They work like this. And the third link of this chain is very important for you. Because the third link of the chain, because I want you to be at least aware of the powers arrayed against you. The third link in the chain is public opinion. And public opinion is managed largely, perhaps almost exclusively, by 6 or 7 men. Under the administration of Bill Clinton, what was a relatively diverse information media became consolidated in 6 corporations. In another decade, it will probably be consolidated in 3. And if Rupert Murdoch and 5 other people don't want you to know something happened, guess what? You won't know that it happened. It might be the most important event in the world, like Jimmy Dore was astonished at what Mr. Binney told him about NSA and FBI malfeasance, which is incredible. If the American public knew and understood this, they might actually wake up and get angry. But since they're not being told about it, they have no chance of waking up and becoming angry. The third link of the chain of the opposition against which you and I are working is the ignorance that is intentionally fostered by our public sources of information. A week or so ago, I showed you a video of Dorothy Lipstadt rejoicing over her conquest over David Irving. I've subsequently found out that Miss Lipstadt is in fact what I will call the bulldog for the Holocaust defenders, the Holocaust enforcers. That's the word I put. Because the reason I call her the bulldog for the Holocaust enforcers is before taking on David Lipstadt, she wrote a book about Harry Elmer Barnes. Harry Elmer Barnes was a notable, a really great historian of the early 20th century, and he wrote a book about the origins of the First World War. The second part of the title is The Sources of War Guilt. Mr. Barnes' conclusion was that France, in the office of the Premier of France, and Russia, in the office of one of the high officials, were actually the origins of World War I, because Russia wanted the Dardanelles and France wanted Alsace-Lorraine. Interestingly enough, Mr. Barnes interviewed Wilhelm II. Wilhelm II was the last emperor of the German Empire, and he was kicked out when Germany became a republic at the end of World War I. Wilhelm II was glad that Mr. Barnes did not blame Germany for the World War I, but he disagreed with Mr. Barnes on a key point. Mr. Barnes thought that France and Germany, or France and Russia, were the primary causes of World War I, and Wilhelm II said, no, sir, it was Jewish international bankers. Now, I've mentioned to more than one group here that the bankers were very instrumental in getting World War I underway, both Gentile and Jewish. So I might be in disagreement with Bill, but the point that I want to make in this context is you won't read about bankers being the source of World War I or World War II or Vietnam, because you're not supposed to know that. There is not a war that has been fought in the 20th century that was not financially backed by some important banking group. Those are the powers arrayed against us, and so I wish I had an encouraging word to share with you, but at least if you know who the enemy is, you're better prepared to fight him, her, or it.
And the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing is all about money.
Yes.
And it was created you know, when Truman said we're going to, well, Truman didn't say it, but he was the front man that said, we're going to have a standing army. Why did we need a standing army in 1945? In 1948, when the UN wrote the Human Rights Doctrine, they also created the State of Israel at the same time.
And the history of the United Nations voting for the partition of the land of Palestine. That's another related but somewhat distinct issue.
Yeah.
We're going to conclude class for now and open the questions and comments and insurrection now. Catherine.
So, was he saying that the NSA was actually working with local law enforcement as well?
Yes.
You mean like the police and the sheriff's departments, not
Yes.
just the FBI?
Yes.
So they're saying, okay, so we know this person's dealing drugs. Why would the local law enforcement, and wouldn't there be some moral local law enforcement that says, you know, we're not gonna take something from the NSA?
I don't know, well, I have at least 3 different ways of responding to your question, so let me ask you to,
Unless they're bribed, or they say,
No.
we have stuff on you, or
So-
whatever, I guess.
so what is
I'm
your
talking about
question?
law. So my question is, wouldn't there be somebody at the local law enforcement level who would have complained about this from a constitutional standpoint? If this is such a widespread happening.
So the
I'll ask the
first-
question, I'm going to respond in another sense. If manipulation of the news is as widespread as Udo Ulfkati and a host of other journalists have said, why isn't someone complaining about it?
All right.
And the reason they're not complaining about it, it goes along with what Catherine Austin Fitts said in another context. Almost everybody goes along to get along.
But then when the feds say to the sheriff, we're gonna take your funds away from you
If you don't
if
cooperate.
you don't cooperate, that's one level. Another level is that all of the county jails in Iowa are leased from the counties by the feds. So when Bill Ossie was put in jail on a federal charge, he was put in the Lynn County Jail for about 6 months. Then they moved him from the Lynn County Jail up to Waverly. They kept him in Waverly for 3 months. Then,
Away from his family.
you know, and when he got in there, in order to make phone calls out were being charged at the rate of $1 a minute, $5 a minute, depending on which jail you're in, what you were doing. So the whole money-making scheme around the jails is mind-boggling if you have a chance to look into it. He was in jail for 18 months. They had him in 5 different jails in 18 months. And he's got a theme that he called diesel prosecution, or anyway, they would come in at night at 11 o'clock at night, take them out, put them into a small bus, and drive them all night to some other place. You remember a couple of months ago, or this car that was going the wrong direction on 80 and killed
X number of people, yeah.
okay, so the whole jail system is this huge money-making scheme that uses us, using our tax dollars.
Yep.
You did it tonight for overtime.
Yeah, I mean, there's just an endless number of,
There are an almost infinite number of ways of extracting money from the poor and having it go upstream, Catherine. That's, in all candor, and I'm sorry to say it, that's the short message. Because whether we're talking about the tax system, whether we're talking about the penal system, whether we are talking about toll roads. This whole business of Trump advocating a private-public partnership for improving the infrastructure of the United States, that's a great way of extracting money from the people who use the highways. And because the private ownership of the tollway will prevent public roads from being built in competition with it, and sooner or later, like the Indiana tollway, that tollway will be purchased by the private ownership, and all subsequent tolls from that point on, the money will go uphill rather than going back in the public coffer, which is another great reason for endorsing what Ellen Brown and Dawn Jones and a number of people are endorsing, and that is public banks, both at the local level, at the state level, and perhaps sometimes in the unforeseeable future at the federal level, so that the banking fees that currently go into the pockets of bankers can go back into the treasury departments of Iowa City, Johnson County, the state of Iowa, and the federal treasury. There is no reason that can't be done, except, unfortunately, legislatures are subject to being purchased. They're subject to being purchased in two different fashions. They're purchased because if they spend enough money to be elected, that is a way of purchasing the vote from the public. And if a lobbyist buys a legislator, then that legislator is both honor bound and indirectly expected to serve the interests of the lobbyist. Now this has been in progressive direction since the middle of the 19th century. With the, I don't recall the name of the court action. Do you, Dawn? When the Supreme Court said that money is a form of speech and therefore you're allowed to talk as much as you can.
Citizens United. Citizens United.
Citizens United. That was simply the confirmation that the ruling elite own our government. It should have been obvious when the Supreme Court appointed George Bush president in 2000. But with Citizens United, it just became obvious. Any corporation that invests in a legislator, that corporation's average return on investment is 700%. If you look at the total of money that is given to legislators versus the benefits that accrue to the corporation buying that legislator, they make $700 on every dollar they invest in a legislator. And I would love to find the investment where I could make a 700% return.
The toll road in Pennsylvania is 9 cents a mile. Okay, now if you turn that into gasoline tax, and if you got 20 miles to the gallon with your car, that means that would be $1.80 a gallon road tax or gasoline tax. And they keep telling us that they can't add another 10 or 15 cents so they can really fix the roads. But they can arrange for 5 cents a mile, 10 cents a mile, 9 cents a mile, and hell, who knows what it costs to cross bridges out on the East Coast, you know? So the public banking, or the public owning of banks is an essential move to.
But as long as our governments are owned by the corporations, it's not going to
Yeah,
happen.
that ain't gonna happen, right? You know, another example, the sheriff down in Austin, Texas, told the feds to take their money and get lost. And the.
I hope he said it more vigorously than that.
Oh, yeah, but,
Yeah.
okay,
That's
so
okay.
the governor said to the sheriff, I'm gonna have you booted out of office. she said, you help yourself. And she's still in office, and she's not taking any Fed money. And so to fight back is really critical.
Now, I am glad to hear about the example. I think it is a tragedy that Lincoln did not negotiate with the Confederacy, because the problem you see now about money owning the government was on the back burner. It was evident, but it was not, it had not grown teeth and claws in 1787. With the victory of the Union over the Confederacy, the principle of money dominating government grew teeth and claws. You can see that with the way Supreme Court judgments were made in the latter half of the 19th century. With the banks gaining control of the money supply in 1913, it appears to be irreversible, but, and I think this is a very important exception, it can be reversed, but only if Americans wake up and smell the coffee. But as long as we are diverted with gun violence, with opioid crisis, with Putin being a dictator, with all of this garbage, we will not be able to identify and resist our actual enemy. In 2003, millions of people went to the streets to oppose the American invasion of Iraq. Unfortunately, a relatively small percentage of those millions took to the streets in Washington, D.C. or New York City. And if we had gathered Americans to wake up and see what was happening, we could have stopped them, and we still can stop them. But the last note on my cheat sheet for today is, as long as identity politics dominate federal politics, so long as I am separated from women, from blacks, from Puerto Ricans, from gays versus heterosexuals versus homosexuals, as long as the political spectrum is us versus them, we'll never be able to identify the person or the people who are pulling the damn strings. And the people who are pulling the damn strings are laughing at us all the way to the banks that they own.
Yeah, the divide and rule law.
Applies now as it did 5 millennia ago. So keep on working to educate your friends, because that's where it has to start. Thank you.